People sometimes say, was there ever an Adam and Eve? And of course there wasn't in the sense of Genesis, but then people will say, well, yes, but there probably was. What about African Eve? What about mitochondrial Eve? What about this woman whom we're all descended from? We get all our mitochondria, which come down through the maternal line. What about mitochondrial Eve? There is empirical genetic evidence that a woman did indeed live in Africa something over 100,000 years ago, who gave us, all of us, our mitochondria that we inherited from our mother, from our maternal grandmother, our maternal great-grandmother, and so on. That's empirical work. The point I want to make now, though, is that it is logically necessary that there had to be such a woman. It's nice that we've got the empirical evidence, but actually, from the depths of your armchair, you could have concluded that, yes, there has to be a woman from whom we are all descended, from whom we get all our mitochondria. I'm going to distinguish three different individuals: mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Adam, and our most recent common ancestor. And all three of those necessarily had to exist, although we don't necessarily know when or where. Our most recent common ancestor is the individual from whom all of us are descended most recently. And I can prove to you, by the mathematical technique of reductio ad absurdum, that there had to be such an individual. In fact, I can prove something rather more striking than that, which is that if you go back sufficiently far in time, in a time machine, you will find that every individual you meet, as you open the door of your time machine and get out, every individual you meet is either the ancestor of all living humans or of none of them. There are no intermediates between them. That's a rather remarkable fact, and I can prove it to you without ever leaving the armchair. Or conversely, going forwards, we can say that of all of us in this room, if we go sufficiently far forward in time and look at humans in the remote future, there are some of us in this room who will be the ancestor of everyone alive, and there are others of us in this room who will be the ancestor of nobody alive. And there are no intermediates. It's either everybody or nobody. Isn't that a striking thought? Is it a striking thought? Yeah. Here's the proof. It's the mathematician's method of reductio ad absurdum. Suppose we go back ludicrously far. Suppose we go back to the Devonian era, where our ancestors were fish. So I can trace my ancestry back to a fish, and so can you. My fish has got to be your fish. Because in order for that not to be true, the descendants of my fish and the descendants of your fish would have had to evolve in parallel through the same intermediate pathways all the way to becoming humans, chastely refraining from ever mating with each other. That's the only way in which it could be true that my fish is different from your fish. So there has to be a fish which is the ancestor of every human, and there are other fish which are maybe its contemporaries who are the ancestors of none. Now, it's easy to see that that's true if you go back as far as a fish. We don't have to go back nearly that far. We only have to go back, then it becomes a matter of more detailed calculation and actual empirical measurement to say how far we have to go until we find an individual who is the most recent common ancestor of every single one of us in the world today. And that individual probably lived a matter of a few tens of thousands of years ago. That is not mitochondrial Eve. Mitochondrial Eve is our most recent common ancestor in the female line, because mitochondria only go down the female line. Mitochondrial Eve lived earlier than our most recent common ancestor because there are so many more ways of being an ancestor than just the maternal line. You can be an ancestor by going father, grandmother, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandmother, and so on. There are millions of different ways of being an ancestor. And so obviously, given all possible ways of being an ancestor, our most recent common ancestor has to be a more recent one than mitochondrial Eve, since mitochondrial Eve is the most recent ancestor down only one pathway, this trickle of genes down the right-hand end of the family tree. Similarly, Y chromosome Adam. All males have a Y chromosome, no females do. All males get their Y chromosome from their father, their paternal grandfather, their paternal great-grandfather, and so on. Once again, the trickle from the left-hand end of the family tree. So Y chromosome Adam has to be another one who is earlier than our most recent common ancestor. But Y chromosome Adam, by a totally different line of reasoning, probably lived more recently than mitochondrial Eve. And certainly Y chromosome Adam never met mitochondrial Eve. The reason I say Y chromosome Adam lived more recently is that there are more ways of having descendants if you're male. You're more likely to have lots of descendants if you're male than if you're female. And the reason for that is that a male is capable of having hundreds of descendants. And one or two males in history have. If you look at the Y chromosome of many peoples in Central Asia, they all derive from a single male who lived around about the time of Genghis Khan. Muley Ishmael the Bloodthirsty had more than 800 children.